right then. So let's call the Committee of the Whole meeting open. Let's move on to the adoption of the agenda. Councillor Simard, I move that we adopt the agenda as set forth. Seconded by Councillor Simard. We have a quorum here. All those in favor? Fine. Disclosures of pecuniary interests? None. Delegations and presentations? None. Petitions and correspondence? None. Notice of motion? None. Question period or comments if there are members who would like to, if people in attendance that would like to to ask a question or make a comment? None. Fine. Report from the United Counties of Prescott and Russell. The committee is absent. Fine. Let's go on now to committee reports. Committee of Adjustment. The Committee of the Whole recommends that Council confirms that Bylaw 2011-33 remain in force, and that the subsequent option be adopted. So we can stop there for the reading. Is it okay if we stop there before deciding upon the option, please? So, seconder, Mr. Levert, fine. Questions or comments? Mr. Lalonde, just to simplify things, we should revert back to what we were doing in the past and keep the remuneration that was paid out at that point in time, and the amount was $100 for the chair and $75 for members. What's option 3? Well, it's to modify the amounts to something else. We'd asked at the last meeting to come up with comparables with surrounding neighborhoods or surrounding communities, and we're well within the range. So that would be the recommendation. Well, there are many municipalities that pay much less, but they don't have our size, however. That's right. But we're close to what Ottawa pays out, but of course we're not the size of Ottawa. I know that we have the obligation to pay as long as we give something, but the amount, the council members decide as to how much will be paid out. Well, we need to pinpoint an amount as well as the transportation costs involved. What are you saying? Well, I'm not the one that's behind this bylaw. If you're suggesting that we go lower, a higher amount is proposed at present. I'm just saying that the actual costs at present costs are comparable to what's paid out in Ottawa and not what's paid out in surrounding municipalities. But we still have 2 municipalities within our surroundings that are paying much higher. Russell and another one also. Any other points? Any other comments? So, Mr. Lalonde, you're proposing option 1. Could we have someone to second option 1? Councillor Simard, let's go on to the vote. Those who are in favor of option 1, please keep your hands raised. Fine. Carried then. That's fine. Item 9.2, Mr. Cardarelli, please. 9.2, transfer of funds. Whereas all the required contracts have recently been awarded for the culvert replacement project on Laundry Road, including a 10% contingency which has been secured, and whereas a surplus of approximately $90,000 is projected at the completion of the project, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council authorizes that the budget for the culvert replacement project on Laundry Road be reduced from $373,500 to $318,500, and that the difference, being an amount of $55,000, be transferred to the capital program scratch coat pavement. Yes, scratch coat pavement on Old Highway 17, which consequently will be increased from $175,000 to $230,000. Seconded by Councillor Simard. Any questions or comments? Councillor Lalonde, with this injection of funds, are we going to put an end to works on old Highway 17? This has been dragging on now for the past 3 years. And as soon as work is finished, there's a small section that still needs to be resurfaced, but at least it shall be finished. And it's going to give us very nice accent or proper access. All those in favor? Carried. 9.3, Strategic Asset Management. Councillor Simard. Yes, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approves the Strategic Asset Management Policy as presented in report number INF 2019-019. Seconded by, I still have difficulty with names. With Mrs. Chouanière, the law compels us to do so. Councillor Bouchard.
Asset Management Steering Committee, which our directors are going to be sitting on. Do all of our directors have enough training in asset management, or is this something we need to look at as well? I mean, asset management is, I find, is extremely important. It's with all of our projects. It's not just the province that's asking us to do it, but at the same time, it's just good for a municipality as far as management is concerned. So do all of our directors have that knowledge of what asset management is and what good asset management is? Or is this something we need to look at if we need to have more training? Or a consultant steering the steering committee? Not sure how that would work, but...
Madame Collier, Monsieur Léonard.
Yeah, so in terms of, we have our asset management group, who is really the experts in asset management at the city. They are part of the steering committee, but then all the other directors also. So directors have various different levels of expertise or knowledge in asset management. They're all knowledgeable to what's needed in their departments, but then some have a greater understanding in terms of its total impact. So for example, our treasurer knows a lot more about the finance and how that interconnects with the finance, and then because asset management is under our department, we have a greater understanding how that works in terms of operational and all of that. So following this approval of this policy, we're then going to form a, what you call a, sorry, I'm missing the word, no, not steering committee, it's asset management framework. Sorry, that's going to be brought forward to council. That's going to explain how we're going to take this policy and operationalize it. So you're going to really see how each pieces are going to use this policy in their day-to-day basis and how that affects their decision making. So through that, everybody is going to be knowledgeable and be able to incorporate that in their daily activities.
So my concern is I don't want to just have this just because it's policy that we have to have. I want to make sure that we're doing very well with it and that we have the knowledge that's being collected. And if we don't have the knowledge, well, let's have the training, make sure we get it so that this is efficient. So I'm satisfied with it.
So we are, and then there's a whole bunch of different groups that through the province and different organizations that provide training, often free to the city, and we often sign up for that. But sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, and then also where was I going with this? Yeah, so there's ongoing training. And then on top of that, in terms of what the recommendations are or the requirements are, this is just the first step. And then there's other requirements that are for, I think it's 2021. We're already at that stage. So we're way ahead of the curve in terms of where we are with asset management. Good.
Madame Collier, voulez-vous rajouter quelque chose?
I just wanted to elaborate that prior to the previous election, Mr. Lenhart held the position of asset management, and I threw him out there to every bit of training under the sun. So he has got a lot of expertise in the area. And one of the original reasons I was hired at the city was to work on the asset management plan. So I have a substantial amount of training myself in that area. So I feel confident that we have the training we need. I appreciate you offering training because it's very important. So if we see a need, we'll certainly take advantage of that.
Madame Chouanière, vous aviez
when we did the last time, 2 years ago, when we applied for some grants, we needed the management plan.
Exactly.
There was no framework at that time? Because of the time span, we didn't have time to create a framework?
Yes, so the asset management framework that I was referring to is something that the municipality is going to put in place. in terms of how
Okay.
we use our asset management policy.
Okay, not the framework of what
No, so
the government wants to see in the, okay.
So they have their framework, but we'll have ours in terms of how we're going to use this policy
Okay.
on a day-to-day basis.
And how everybody is involved to fill it.
Who's affected to it, how does the operations key into that, into the decision making and everything. So,
Okay, okay, that makes sense.
C'est bon? D'autres points, c'est bon? Passons.
Any other points? Fine. Let's go on to the vote. All those in favor? Carried then. Thank you. Let's go on to the next item. Amendment to Lacroix Road. Yes, amendment to Lacroix Road Rehabilitation Strategy. Councillor Levert, whereas the 2019 Capital Works budget identified funding in the amount of $525,000 to mill and pave Lacroix Road this year, and whereas a geotechnical investigation, yes, a geotechnical investigation confirmed that a section of approximately 400 meters of the roadway will require full reconstruction at an estimated cost of $390,000. This additional work will require a funding increase for the project, and the rehabilitation of Lacroix Road can be phased over 2 years, 2019 and 2020, and whereas it will be necessary to receive approval for the Phase 2 works as part of the 2020 Capital Works budget deliberations. Be it resolved that construction activities be phased as follows. Phase 1, 2019, mill and pave from Gagne Road, 990 meters eastwards. Phase 2, 2020, full reconstruction of the 400-meter soft spot and mill and pave 110 meters eastwards to Guindon Road. To be considered during the course of the budget discussions in 2020. Mrs. Choignard, I have an amount of 990. Yes, it's just a mistake with regards to typing out the document. Mr. Simard, we had proceeded to a geotechnical study in November 2018, and we approved the budget in January. Why did we not obtain these details in January? Well, of course, we proceeded with a geotechnical study, and at the time in which we did obtain the report, we were already in the midst of budgetary costs, so we didn't have the time to analyze contents, all the particular contents of this particular report that encompassed different areas of Clarence and Rockland. This project was pegged to start at 2020. We alluded to the fact that there might be a possibility that something of that nature would occur. So we were more or less aware that we'd be caught adjusting the amount. Councillor Levert, when you say starting from Gagné going eastward, is it up to Les Tulipes? Well, Des Tulipes, should I say? Well, that part from Des Tulipes and Gagné, that's the account. Those are the United Counties of Prescott Russell that are involved there. We'll be doing work on the intersection going eastward from there. I see. So, given this mandate, we'll proceed with a more precise or pinpointed geotechnical study as to what needs to be done there. Well, I want to know exactly where it goes to. Well, that's what we'll be able to determine within the mandate given out to the geotechnical firm that will be proceeding with a geotechnical study. And they will identify what needs to be done, of course, in light of the budget that's allotted. Costs associated will be paid out or determined as of 2020. I understand that we can go to Guindon or Butler, but I'm wondering if we can go further along in the village. Well, we might come up with more surprises. We have 525 plus 190 to spend this year as well as next year to build this stretch. 525 was set aside, but only 395,000 will be used to work over that part that we're certain can be worked on. Plus, we can go to tender with regards to those parts needed to be rebuilt. We'll be left over with $130,000. Now, if Town Council wishes in 2020 to complete this project, then we can do so. So you say that the United Counties of Prescott Russell will be working on a given stretch. We'll have to coordinate. Yes, definitely. But it's within the confines of one sole contract. So everything will be coordinated from an asphalt perspective. Councillor Levert, is it possible on Wednesday to have a meeting with someone who could indicate to me at least where this 800-meter stretch is located at, and as to what was uncovered during the course of the geotechnical review that was performed previously? Well, they have to proceed to another test, by the way. I believe they uncovered some anomalies. Yes. Certainly. We'll pinpoint those difficulties for you in a further report. Let's go on to the vote then. All those in favor? Carry then. Thank you. Let's go on now to the baseline road safety review. Councillor Simard, Councillor Lalonde.
31082 Baseline Road has been subjected to numerous accidents as a result of the posted speed limit and curvature of the roadway. And whereas HP Engineering has been retained to conduct a safety review of Baseline Road in order to identify roadway improvements to address the safety concerns, that the Committee of the Whole recommend that Council approve the proposed improvements contained in Section 5 of Report INF 2019-021 for implementation as soon as possible, and that the Committee of the Whole recommend that Council consider the adoption of bylaw to reduce the speed limit on a section of Baseline Road to 60 kilometers per hour from the Baseline Road and Saint-Jean-Filion intersection to then 40 kilometers an hour from 1052 to 1169 Baseline Road before resuming to 80 kilometers per hour.
Secondaire.
Seconded by Councillor Bouchard. Comments or questions? Councillor Zant.
Yes, I know Mr. Lalonde's been asking as well as I have. I kind of still, I get why we're doing what we're doing. It's the study that was recommended, but I still worry for this family. I'd be worried if I was on that corner, and I understand that we're going to do the 3 cable thing now. What is the difference between the 3 cables that the study is proposing versus a full-on guardrail?
So both are acceptable. The real difference is that the guardrails with the metal I-beam posts are a very, very solid wall that if something hits that, there is going to be some serious damage to that vehicle and possibly life-threatening accidents that could result from that. Whereas the cables, they're designed to attenuate the impact a bit more. So you typically wouldn't have the guardrails that you're asking about in a curve like this. You'd have something that's better so that it attenuates the speed. It doesn't completely stop the vehicle like a dead stop, but it prevents it from going a distance onto the property. Okay. So we feel that one is better suited for that location.
Because we also want to make sure that the family's safe.
Yes.
Living there, right?
Yes.
So when you're saying, it's just, I couldn't help but thinking when you're like, we don't want anything to happen to the driver. Well, we also don't want anything to happen to the resident. So.
Understood, but in terms of city, we do have liabilities in terms of what we're placing within our right-of-way.
All right.
And if we're placing something that could cause damage or harm to a driver, the city could be held liable for that. So we kind of have to weigh both of them together, and which one's the better suited. And in this case, the three cable wire guardrails are.
And they're a standard height, correct?
Yeah.
You can't make them a little higher or whatever. They're standard height.
They're at the height that are designed for a vehicle.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm going to cut in there. If we install a full guardrail, think about Innis Road when you go east leaving Trim.
Yeah.
There's a huge S-turn. It's all solid guardrail. If the person follows the speed limit and hits that guardrail at 40 km an hour, there's no danger of injury to them. Yeah. Our main concern, and in order, is the safety of our residents. If you're telling me that the 3 cable is a better stopping method than the full guardrail, I'd like to get the studies on that. if the person speeds, and I'm not saying that we don't make mistakes, but at one point you assume responsibility of that speeding. If you miss the curve, there's two things you want. You want to stop, because if you start climbing, you might hurt somebody. And the people in the house, I believe, deserve to be fully safe. If not, I would put anything on my yard to prevent a car from hitting. So I'm more, and I just want to add this, the three cables are going away. Like I see them on Regional Road 174. They used to have three cables. They're all replacing with full barriers. So I understand your concern that trying to slow the vehicle better, because we could be liable, but the minute we analyze that he's speeding, I mean, the liability is not ours.
So, and I understand that position. We could review the initial recommendation that we got from our engineer firm that looked at that, is also how that curve is positioned, the geometry of that based on how the road is. So in terms of a solid guardrail like we're talking about, there are different things that would be required, like attenuators. Then there's the entrance that poses a huge issue in terms of being able to install that type of guardrail, but still maintain an entrance for the house.
Yeah.
And then it's juggling all of that together where the recommendation felt that.
I'm just going to finish. If we find a Band-Aid solution and something happens further on, I'm going to feel really bad. If we have to straighten that road, reduce the curve, like we have rain problem, we have all sorts of problem on that road, on that specific area. So if we start by doing one thing right, which is protecting a resident, I don't know the difference of the cost, and I don't know how much we paid for the study, because it's pretty much what's almost installed there, except the three cable. I don't know how much we paid. Did we do it on our own?
No, we actually paid for the study. They
How much?
came up with a good recommendation in terms of speed, so they
Yeah.
didn't just analyze the speed issue, reduce the speed. They analyzed the signage issue. They analyzed the curve.
Okay.
They analyzed a lot of conditions that their recommendations are. I mean, it's a simple recommendation, but it's a very effective recommendation. So.
I agree. Sorry.
Can I just continue on, and maybe
Sorry.
no, it's fine. I like your point. We can also override this and change it and say, rather than the three cable, we would like a full guardrail.
Yeah, we just don't have the price.
Well, it's true, but why would a report come to us without any pricing?
There is pricing for this specific
The-
guardrail.
Right, but
For the full barrier, there's no pricing for it.
Well, because it wasn't recommended, so we recommended the guardrails with the
Okay.
three cable, and the pricing was associated with
well,
that.
You want to?
well, I would just like, maybe we can defer and come back at the next meeting with some pricing on a full guardrail.
I'll start by the end, Monsieur Small.
Okay, with that guardrail though, when you have the one with the I-beams and all that, you have, because of the design, some of them you have to be extended, like it could be even in the way of her laneway. So there could be an issue there also, so it depends on what the engineer designs for, because you need an extension to it, you can't just have it finishing like abruptly. So as a post. As a post. It has to have like a cushion and all that, so if somebody runs it the other way. So we could be blocking the laneway. So that's all has to be designed and checked before we say that's what we want, and we don't want the cable one.
The time is of the essence here too.
Yeah, but
They'd
she
like to
does,
move- they'd
she
like to move
can't
back
go
into
into
their
her
house.
laneway, she.
No, I understand that, but either way, there has to be a study done about the lane,
Yeah.
whether it's cable or full-on guardrail.
Monsieur Bouchard?
Well, part of my question was is that which is this point in the report, they all say like, so part of an issue is the laneway. Well, is there anything that can be done about, the positioning of the laneway? I mean, how far did their land actually go? Could they actually go up higher up the hill? I mean, are there options there? And the other thing I was going to say is to your proposal of deferring. If we defer right now, then it's not going to go till August.
No, we can bring it back to regular next.
Monsieur Lennart, you had your,
Yeah, well, it's just, all I just wanted to add was that one of the considerations that our engineer firm looked at, so in the report they didn't detail exactly what the difference is between the guardrails, but one of the reason why the recommendation with the three cable was just that, is that we can't end that abruptly. If we extend that into their driveway, then they don't have a driveway anymore. It becomes really complicated installing that in that location.
so that's why they went with the three cable option.
Yeah, part of their rationale was because of that. Yeah, not just because it's a stop for stop, but also because of the geometry of the. So there are. I mean, you mentioned realignment of the road, which I don't think that this is something in terms of time isn't feasible to address their concern at this time.
On pourrait demander, c'est confortable.
Madame Chaudière?
I think it's a combination of measures. If the speed is reduced, and then you have to keep it
No one's going to do 40.
50, even if they go
It's still
50.
40 right now, it's 60 that they're moving from 80 to 60. So now instead of going from 80 to 40, you're going to go from 60 to 40.
Okay, so people will go,
But it's still 40.
will go 60, yeah.
Écoutez, on a une proposition. Si,
Look, we have a proposal before us. We can vote on it. If anyone can come up with another or an alternative, that's fine. We can. Do you prefer that we vote on this or to defer further discussion or decision and obtain another answer? But it doesn't. I apologize. I didn't know that you did not speak French.
situation where you would need to change the entrance of your laneway because of the bump, you know, when a hard...
Obviously I'm not an engineer, I can't personally see that because
Yep.
there's enough of a bend, I feel.
Okay,
Am I allowed to ask a question?
absolutely. If you want to come up to the microphone. And for the minutes, please state your name quickly and your address.
Sherry Storson at 1082 Baseline Road, Clarence Creek. So you're talking about a guide rail with cables. I'm just wondering if there's studies done on what speed that will stop a vehicle, because the last vehicle actually took out a tree with a base of about a foot diameter and still was able to impact the house and move it about a foot. So I'm just wondering.
Monsieur
if
Leonard.
there's-
I don't believe that speed, but I think that is a situation that, regardless of what you put it there, is a possibility of occurring. So depending on where that vehicle hits, even if it's a steel beam, if it's a steel beam, there are chances of it still, depending on the speed going through. But it's something that we can look at. So so in terms of the issue with the radius is how that turns into your lane. So it's not really the curve itself, but it's then for going from the curve to, that needs to enter into your lane, and so the radius to be able to do that, the distance between the curve, that's the issue. But it's something that we could come up, if council desires, something that we can look into, come back with a design and demonstrate what can be done if that's the preferred solution. And if that's the case, then we'll come up with a design.
Monsieur Leval.
I think we've had all the recommendations that were asked. I think we should go ahead with the recommendation because I don't see waiting for a price for another thing. We can't put a price on the safety of our constituents. So I think if that's recommended and it's going to stop the traffic, why don't we go with that? I mean, we spend enough time and investment by our departments in that.
Madame Chaudière.
I also suspect that if the other option was also an option, you would have commented on it in the report. You would have
Yeah.
mentioned that preferably this would be a better solution, but this would also be a proper solution. And since they didn't
We're
mention
assuming a
that,
lot of things.
Yes, so both were
Correct.
both were supported. So both are a good option. The difference is that in terms of the geography, you may have an issue with the other one to be able to physically fit it on that site. But we didn't go further in terms of evaluating exactly what that would look like because of that concern. So we've then opted for the second option, which was as good of an option in terms of reducing the speed and stopping the vehicle.
yeah, but if they do mention that in the report, that if they mention it, it's because they must have assessed that possibility, what the consequences would be. They wouldn't just mention,
So in terms of assessment, all they did is look at the two of them. They looked at how would that fit on there at a very high level because we didn't give them the mandate to look at designing that. So they looked at it and they have concerns about being able to fit it on that site because of the way that curve is, the way the entrance is located along that curve, and the way that you'd have to build those radiuses to be safe. But that doesn't mean that the full analysis was done. Can that laneway be shifted a bit? Possibly. Maybe some other alternatives could be found. All we know is that at this time, that wasn't the recommendation in terms of what we're trying to achieve in a timely manner. So it doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means that we'd have to investigate it further.
Monsieur Lalonde.
I think I'm ready to vote on this, and if people vote against it, then he can come up with a plan.
Yeah, there's also maybe the option of deferring and getting a price for a full barrier.
I'm just,
Well, it's just because in 2 weeks, are you gonna have time to go back to the engineering firm, redesign something, and get us a price? You know, because otherwise, as I think if it's Don that said, you know, we're gonna be in September before this thing gets done. So, because we're not, that's just my.
if the resident is happy with 3 cables, then I'm happy with 3 cables. I think this is her house. It's not like it's affecting 15 houses, it's affecting 1. And I'd like to know what the resident, if she feels comfortable with this, then I will vote for it. If not, then I will defer, whatever she wants.
It's not,
I want my family to be safe,
it's not proper to put that on you.
and
No, but
I would like a more secure barrier than 3 cables. Just
That's
the
what I was
fact that I've lived through this twice. But do I want something that's gonna be there by June 14th, which is my move-in date, which is exactly 11 months to the day since I had to move out? Like, if you could put something there tomorrow,
Yeah, we're
that'd be
doing our
great.
best with the,
So, and I appreciate all the support that we're getting, so ideally, can we put up the 3 cables right away and then look at another thing? Probably not, I don't really know how to fairly answer that question.
I just didn't want to vote for something that you'd be totally.
No, and I
sincere about.
totally-
So,
I
but if
totally
the 3
get it.
cables is what seems to be consensus, then I will go with consensus.
Oh, there's a reason why we have engineers and we have a department making recommendations, I think. I think if Julien's team has looked it over and made the assessment that this is a viable option,
Yeah.
I think we should.
OK. Alors, vous voulez aller au vote?
Oui.
OK, on va
You
passer.
want to go to the vote? Let's go on to the vote. Those in favor of the 3 cable barricade? Fine. So we're going with the 3 cable option. Thank you for your patience. Item 9.6, consulting services for 2019, Councillor Zant. Whereas Mr. Darch has taken part in the advancement of initiatives such as the Caron project, the pond, the departmental studies, and others, and because Mr. Kehoe participated in the advancement of key initiatives such as contractual negotiations with the CIH building, purchases and sales of town-owned properties, and economic ventures, and whereas he has more than 30 years as a manager of operations, and whereas he is in a proper position to take a look at the operational structures and processes that impact public works, and whereas Council has approved budgets for consulting services in the amount of $100,000 within report FIN 2019-14, and whereas the salary budget is now at a surplus, be it resolved that we retain his services in the amount of $30,000, and that the Committee of the Whole authorizes Council to deviate from the supply and services bylaw that will give out contracts to unique sources for consultant services and in subcontracting, and that the Chief Administrative Officer be authorized to sign this contract. Signed by Councillor Levert. Any questions or comments? Let me start to my right. Councillor Zant. Well, because of the fact that, well, I don't know. I almost feel like this is...
2 of them are also former employees, so, well, actually 1 of them. Yeah. Est-ce qu'on a le droit?
Do we have the right to launch into a discussion? Yes, you do. Mr. Chairman, I'm in agreement with you. If those are people that we're not aware of or that we do not know, these are past employees. And we'll come back with a clear directive in front of the camera, but I think that these are situations where it would be probably best if Madam Clerk is in agreement with that to revisit the closed meeting and decide this issue. Well, I propose that we withdraw to a closed meeting, and we might do so right now. We'll take 5 minutes. Seconded by Councillor Levert. Yes, we'll retire right now, and it'll take 5 minutes to retire to a closed meeting. So do we need to open a meeting, open a closed meeting and close a closed meeting after that? Fine. All right then. Well, that was short and sweet, wasn't it? So we're calling for the closing of the closed meeting. I'm asking that someone move that we close the closed meeting. Moved by Councillor Zant, seconded by Councillor Cardarelli. All those in favor of putting an end to the closed meeting session? Fine. There's a resolution that was read, and I believe there's a modification to be made to it. I would withdraw by modification the second paragraph of the resolution. That's going to modify, of course, the total amount and to reduce by $30,000. Well, the second paragraph that starts with the following, whereas, yes, the second whereas. But in your resolution, however, you mention what, I can read it again if you wish. Mrs. Ouellet, do you want me to read it again? Maybe if you'd like to read it the way we want to adopt it, because Mr. Darche has largely taken part in key initiatives such as Caron Road, the Pond Project, and departmental policies, and whereas Mr. Lalonde has more than 30 years of management operational procedures as Director of Public Services for the town of Gatineau, and more particularly, he is better well placed to optimize structures and operational processes with regards to public works. And whereas Council has approved the budget for consulting services in the amount of $100,000 in Report FIN 2019-14, I'm sorry. Yeah, we removed the $30,000. That the Committee of the Whole recommend that Council approve a budget for consulting services in the amount of $100,000. And the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council authorizes town administration to circumvent the supply and services bylaw that grants contracts to sole service suppliers under subcontractor, and that the Chief Administrative Officer be allowed to proceed to a signed agreement. All those in favor then? Carried. So adopted as modified. Yes, ma'am, that's right. That's exactly it. Item 9.7, Deschamps Park parking. Mr. Bouchard, the Committee of the Whole recommends that Municipal Council authorizes the transfer of $36,762 from the road reserve and $23,238 from the equipment reserve to establish a $60,000 budget in order to proceed with the construction of a parking lot along Mercury Street to accommodate the users of the Deschamps Park complex. If I'm allowed there, I can second this motion. Questions or comments? Councillor Cardarelli? No, I wanted to second it myself, sir. Questions or comments? Councillor Simard, are we compelled to dip into the road reserve fund? Because we're talking here about a parking facility, and it's not a road. Well, the report states that this is what is proposed, that the council has the authority to do what it wants and to tap into the reserves as long as we have a support document, be it a bylaw or resolution, that allows us to do so. You might modify your financial sourcing, but you have to make sure that what you're tapping into has, source-wise, has enough funds to meet the needs. In that point, in this particular instance, the reserve fund had enough money left in it. That's how council decided to go about financing this. Fine. Any other questions? Just a tiny comment here. This is a very worthwhile initiative put forward by the Community Services because this park has become a problem, and I'd like to thank the director for his very complete report and his very well redacted report too. All those in favor? Carried. Now let's go on to item 9.8, budget status report, April 2019. Mrs. Chouanière. Yes, that report number FIN 2019-020 being the financial operating budget status for the period ending April 30th, 2019 be received as information. Now seconded by Councillor Simard. Any questions or comments? Let's go on to the vote. All those in favor? Carried then. Fine. Item 9.9, monthly report of the Protective Services. Councillor Simard. I move that report number PRO 2019-014 in regards to monthly statistics be received as information. Seconded by Councillor Levert. Any questions or comments? Yes.
When we discussed the budget this year, one of the comments that came back was that council wanted to look into each department's budgets and try to figure out, what's the optimum service level. And so for training for protection services, I looked at the report, because you've been giving us reports the last maybe, year and a half of the number of training sessions, the hours, stuff. I think it would be in the city's best interest to find out what are other municipalities around us doing as a service level for training for their volunteer firefighters, because we're talking about basically about the volunteer crew. Because I've seen some months where you've had 15 training courses, other months nothing. Certain months had very low hours of training, others had a lot of hours. If we're comparing April to April from this year to last year, there's about 2,000 hours less this year currently than last year. So I'm looking at, we're always looking at optimizing our budgets and stuff, so I think it'd be nice to have a report in time for the next budget to get us a nice comparable to what other municipalities are doing, not only for the mandated training, the training that's obligated under the department itself, and other types of training that are not mandated. There's just professional development and stuff like that. The hours being, the amounts of sessions being offered by those municipalities. I'm thinking of Russell, I'm thinking of Hawkesbury, I'm thinking of Plantagenet, Nation possibly. So just to give us an idea of, what are we over training our people and creating a situation where we are creating volunteer fatigue. Last year we had, I don't have the exact number, but it's around 7,000 hours of training for our volunteers. I think you can include some full-time guys in there, but that's just the training. So on top of that, you get all the calls and all that stuff. So, and we're having some difficulty sometimes in keeping our contingent of 74, 75. So I'm not sure what council thinks, but I think it would be nice to have that to compare with other departments.
My concern is more that it's always been my fear that we train our firefighters very well. They participate to a lot of training, we pay for it, but we don't get the return in the sense that they don't work at least a minimum of hours to cover for the expenses, so it's worth, and because often we train them and then they leave after they got all the training, then they leave and they apply to bigger municipalities, and because they already have the training, it's an asset for them. So like it would be good to see that, yes, we did train our staff, but it was worth it because everybody worked at least more than so many hours. So then it would give value, it would give some value to.
I'll just turn it over to Mr. Wilson, but welcome to the world of volunteering firefighters, where we qualify and they go, I guess. But I'll let you answer.
Training's always a challenge for sure. I can certainly work on bringing back a report, looking at our neighbors. I think the challenge is understanding too that there is a wide range even between fire services and, internally in terms of how fire services view our neighbors, as well as how our neighbors perhaps view us, and in terms of what council's expectation is of our department as compared to what Alfred Plantagenet's expectation of their department is, and so forth. So I think that there are some disparities. Our training hours, the way we do that, if we ran a 40-hour course this month and we had 10 participants in it, you would see that spike by 400 hours. So we did do a lot of first responder training last year to try and certify all of our firefighters to that level. So you're going to see a spike in the initial training hours required to get there across the board, times 70 members. Whereas now that everyone is certified to that level, the maintenance of that is far less demanding in terms of how we maintain those levels of training. So you will see some spikes and valleys in terms of the numbers of hours training. I can certainly work to put something together. In terms of the retention piece, it is always a risk. The good and the bad, I guess, is that to get hired into a full-time firefighting position, roughly 1% of applicants get hired. So I know there are people in our department that apply for full-time positions. They're not all leaving for full-time positions. The competition for those jobs is fierce. There's a lot of people competing for those jobs, and in a roundabout way, we then benefit from these people that are keen, that are interested, that want a good reference from us, and at the same time want to take training. So our municipality benefits in the meantime. We had a member recently leave, get hired into our larger neighbor to the west, that was a member of this department for 10 years, and had been applying for that department, for our neighboring department for 10 years. So, like I said, it took 10 years for that person to get hired, and we as a municipality benefited from that individual for 10 years. We do have a matrix in terms of how we approve training applications. So if you want to take a specialized course, one of the things that we look at is how many calls you've been attending or what your attendance is, so that we try and give some preference to those that are showing up, as opposed to the person that's just here to take training and never come in calls. So we do try and address that as best we can. Nothing's perfect, but at the end of the day, that's what we try and do, and make sure that it's impartial and fair in how we administer those policies.
I think too, it would be important to know of ours. How many do you currently have on staff? Still at 74?
I think we're at 72 or 73 currently.
So those 72, 73, for when I discussed the mandatory stuff and the I'm not going to say optional, but the other types of training. What's the attendance record for training? Are there guys that you see every 6 months? Are there guys that are there like every single training that they can? That type of information I think would be good to have on top of that.
So we do have policy, although it is very difficult to administer right now in terms of training percentages. So there is a requirement in our collective agreement with our volunteer firefighters that stipulated minimum attendance at both calls and training sessions. It's very difficult to administer because it's a manual process, and we have to go through almost each employee and each call record, which is incredibly onerous for my administrator to go through. We are working on creating a report that we can then just hit a button and export that data into something that is more usable. But that's something that's in the process right now. So we have not done a very diligent job in the last number of years of tracking attendance to both training and calls. But we are hoping to improve that so that we can, if there are those members that are falling behind, that we can sort of give them the encouragement to get their attendance back up and or address that attendance issue with that employee.
Because Madame Chouinard is right when she says that it takes I think it's 8,000 or 9,000, 10,000 to train a firefighter from scratch. So we want to have some type of return on our investment, and I get that it's still you're a volunteer. You show up when you can. Obviously people have families and other obligations, but I just want to make sure that we are not keeping people around just for the sake of keeping people around. Because the last thing we want is to go at budget and say, okay, well, we don't have enough people attending, so we need to bump up the 74 or 75 to 80 and 85 to compensate. Because then it means we have to train more people again.
So I hear your comments for sure, Councillor. I share those concerns. We still struggle with the reality that a huge percentage of our population as a whole, including our working population, all happen to work in the city. So we tend to lose the bulk of our volunteers by day, which leaves us really short. That will probably always be an issue unless we can start creating more jobs here that attract people out here. But I share those concerns, and certainly we're working our best to try and figure out the best solution for that, recognizing all of those factors that you mentioned. It's not an easy answer, but it's certainly something that's on my radar, and I'll work to bring you some more information and budget so you can consider it.
Just about.
In your report for municipal enforcement, for 2019, you got 898 of complaints handled, and 18 you have 273. What's the difference?
To the councillor's question, I think part of this is tracking. So we hired a new enforcement manager last year around this time frame. Prior to that, not necessarily the numbers were being tracked in the same fashion. So I To be honest, without digging into the details of that, I wouldn't be able to tell you the exact disparity, but with our new manager that's been in place since May or so of last year, we've seen more consistent numbers come through. So you may see some deviation because of how numbers were tracked prior to that manager coming on board, and the manager that has now been here for about a year, just over a year.
Thank you.
Passe au vote, tout le monde en faveur?
Going to the vote. All those in favor? Carried then. Thank you. Let's go to other items. Let's start off with Mrs. Choignard. Do you have any points to raise? Nothing for me. Councillor Lalonde, yes?
At one point, once we're done with the flooding situation and everything, I think we're going to have a post-mortem with council and the departments to figure out, because there are a couple of things that I think it's twice now that we've had to pump out water in front of the Manoir, 2017 and now, and the reason seems to be that the drain that was installed in front of the Manoir with the construction was too low, because otherwise it would flood if it was installed at a proper height. So did we miss something at construction that generates that, or is it just a circumstance of the flooding that for some reason backflowed into there that shouldn't have? I mean, the building is not that old, so it should be built. The structure itself and whatever's around it should be at least 100-year flood level. Obviously, it's not, because we've had to pump it out.
Je sais pas si vous pouvez répondre à...
I don't know if you can answer this question tonight.
So water can't come through those panels. So one of the reasons why that was pumped is because as the Ottawa River watershed is quite large along that ditch. Also, there's Chamberlain, all within that watershed. So by pumping, we were able to reduce the watershed, not just for some of our infrastructure, but for also some of the homeowners who had that pressure, the additional pressure, right? So it's all that combined. It's not really to deal with those manholes. Those are designed to be watertight seals, so there's no water coming into those manholes. It's a common practice. You can't all raise infrastructure over the 100-year leveling, but you could waterproof level.
So, I mean, I think at one point we're going to have to talk about, once you have all the finance stuff all figured out, so that's fine. Okay, we'll get away from there.
Autre chose? Non. Monsieur Simard.
Mr. Simard? Yes. With regard to the Gilec Road, do we have a date with regards to the geotechnical study and the laying down of asphalt? Well, geotechnical works are pegged for July. And with regards to the surface treatment, either August or September. Fine, thank you. Councillor Levat? Yes. My God. I think I woke him up. He thought he had another resolution to read. Well, the flood victims started removing their sandbags, and there's a Chemin de l'Île resident consulted me, stated that she phoned the municipality on many occasions and determined where to put the used sandbags. They didn't obtain an answer, and they decided to get together in a meeting and decided where to put their sandbags. I just like every member here to be forewarned as to what's happening. I believe it would be wise to contact all other wards. Who's the councillor from that particular ward? Yeah. Well, maybe to warn or to, set down those areas in which sandbags should be in. Just to let you know, I contacted Mrs. Lenart as to determine where the sandbag deposit areas could be, or the collection points could be at. Did we not put that on our website? No, it's a non-official drop zone. What we're going to do is that we're going to go to those areas where some people need to get rid of sandbags. They're going to be clearly identified, and we're going to go door to door also to advise these people, those flood victims, to ask them if they wish to move from one area to another, because we're still under a state of emergency here. Fine. Let's just make sure that well, the website is shared with the flood relief folks. They be informed on site. But as stated by Mr. Zent, I didn't want to target anyone with my remarks. Councillor Bouchard.
Conversation with the resident today who was asking about the whole tornado warnings. Probably one of the most difficult natural disaster to call on people. So yesterday she says, well, we all got, the ring on the cell phone, which was good. With that being said, my 12-year-old daughter, what does she do? She runs outside. She wants to see what's going on. Other older people will say, oh, I gotta go home. I think I left that window open. No, you do not want to be on the roads. But part of our reflection was, we are in an area where we do have a lot of seniors or older people who not necessarily have a cell phone or have a cell phone but keep it turned off. Just, make sure nothing happens into the house. Any thought, any idea, considering tornadoes are becoming more and more in this area, to have some sort of a analog system? Church bells, we have churches, have 1, 2, 3, anything like that. I mean, if the questions was asked just exactly because of seniors not having cell phones.
Mr. Wilson.
Going up.
So there are a couple options. You can still purchase weather emergency alert radios. So if you want an analog system that's not reliant on cellular technology or anything else, you can still buy those old radios that you plug into a 120 thing, and it's quiet all the time until there's an emergency alert, and then it comes alive and starts squawking at you. We've got some downstairs that we keep in our offices in case we get a weather alert. So it's, severe weather warnings and that kind of stuff. So it's quiet, sits there all the time, and then when there's a weather warning, it comes alive and squawks at you and scares the socks off you. But at the end of the day, it works. So there are some options. There's certainly options that council could choose to look at if you wanted. Lots of municipalities back in the Cold War era used like air raid sirens. They're expensive, which are not used every day, so it's an expensive option to look at. But there's other technology that council could look at. If
what do they do in Kansas?
Sirens.
Yeah, well, you can use air raid sirens again in the American tornado alley that sees tornadoes very, very frequently. It's quite common. In our region, although we sit in the tornado alley in Canada, we tend to not see them many times a year. So it tends to be a very expensive investiture for councils to look at. But like I say, emergency alert radios are an inexpensive solution for residents, particularly seniors who may not want to carry a smartphone that's WA enabled. So if they don't want to carry one of the modern smartphones, they can still carry a radio and be alerted to those things.
Okay. Merci.
Thank you. Mrs. Collier, did you want to add something to that?
To this technological age, I realize, because every once in a while I say to my kids, oh, I heard this on the radio. What? They don't listen to the radio anymore. But I was in my car yesterday when the alert came out. I didn't have my phone on. I got it on the radio, and it was on the television, because when I called the mayor after. So for the seniors, my parents are a case in point, who watch TV for 98% of the time they're up. We're well aware we were having a tornado. So I think that the emergency alert system is not just a cell phone, right? It came out, it came on the radio and said, now we'll resume to your regular program. So I think we're probably not too bad.
As covered as we're going to be.
Nothing's perfect.
No, it's not. For tornadoes, it's the toughest disaster to call it.
About air raid sirens in London, how they worked and they didn't work. Okay, so.
Madame Chouanière, vous voulez rajouter quelque chose?
Ms. Chouanière, would you like to add something? I'm wondering if there's a possibility to identify those areas where the elderly live completely alone without any surrounding family members. And when there's an emergency situation that crops up where we could rely on a certain system, some municipalities do so. They do identify some at-risk areas. Well, of course, it's not all that readily evident that the tornado is foreseeable in a few minutes' time. The green lights on Laurier Street, those green posts that have been cut, that have yellow cones, that have peeled off paints and look bad. Where are we at with that? Well, of course, those cones that are not freshly painted, could we at least freshly paint them? If we scratch them off, scratch off the rusty paint a tad bit and repaint it, that would be fine. I know that people in your department are very busy. Well, we tried that in the past, and it didn't give us all that much of a good result. And we're now in the process of reviewing the budget. And, well, even if though we had to do it each and every year, let's allocate a summer employee. It would take 2 days to do what needs to be done. But sometimes half of the lamp is completely exposed to the limit and to the metal, and there are some cones on a lamp post that are completely imposed and and those cones are eyesores. Maybe a coat of clad paint would do fine. Mr. Wilson is smiling now. Well, I'll just send you all an email. If you go to the Bergeron Center, Mr. Bergeron installed 3 different posts in his particular parking facility. And they're LED and solar powered also. These are extraordinary posts. They're located approximately $1,500 installed. They're made out of metal, and the top is made out of plastics. I'll send you an email here because I think that might be something we might consider, depending, of course, at what point you're at in your research. But if you go and take a look at his facility, especially during the evening, they're very nice. But at least a coat of paint would be greatly appreciated. Any other comments, Mrs. Ouellet? I just like to ask you, Mr. Mayor, what did I do? Mr. Lalonde earlier on asked to have a report prepared before the budgetary process is over and done with for training purposes. Now, the directive does not stem from you, but is that a directive that stems from the council as a whole, that this be done? Yes, fine. My God, that's not too bad if that's the only thing that needs to be taken up. Fine, adjournment caused at 9:30. Thank you very much, folks. I did my best.